My name is Natalie Prescott. I am 33, and I work as an insurance underwriter, which means I spend my days looking for risks before they become expensive problems. I never expected that habit to follow me into my relationship. But one Saturday afternoon, while finishing an audit, my phone showed me a picture I could not explain. Brent had told me he was taking his parents and sister to our cabin for the weekend to repair the porch before winter. I could not go because of work, and I believed him when he called it a family work weekend. Then his sister Megan sent a photo from the front steps. Brooke Harrington, Brent's ex-girlfriend. He was standing beside him while his mother placed a spare cabin key in her hand. I stared at the picture before I noticed where everyone was standing. Brooke was wearing Brent's sweater, and nobody looked surprised that she was there. A few minutes later, Megan sent another picture from dinner and wrote that everything felt like old times again. Brooke was sitting in the chair I always used, with Brent's arm resting across the back of it. I still did not call him. The next morning, Brent emailed me a refinance package for the cabin and asked me to sign it before Monday. That was the moment the picture stopped looking like an uncomfortable reunion and started looking like something bigger. 3 years earlier, when I met Brent, he was coming out of a 6-year relationship with Brooke and trying to rebuild his life after a failed investment. He was embarrassed, financially stretched, and sleeping in a friend's spare room. I did not fall in love with someone I wanted to rescue. I fell in love with a man who seemed determined to start over. I believed we were building something steady together. What I could not see then was that one day, the life we built would become the place where I learned he had already started imagining a future without me. When Brent and I started dating, he never asked me to fix his life. He was still working, but nearly $18,000 in debt had followed him out of the relationship with Brooke. His credit was weak, his savings were gone, and every unexpected expense knocked him backward. What I saw was not a man waiting to be rescued, but someone who had no system left. I showed him how I organized my finances and helped him break the debt into payments he could manage. I never paid his balances for him, and I never wanted him to feel like he owed me for staying. When we moved in together, I covered more of the rent for about a year so he could put extra money toward what he owed. Brent took on more sales territory, worked weekends, and slowly started climbing out. That part matters because he really did try. He stopped using credit for things he could not afford, built an emergency fund, and became careful about every payment. About 18 months later, he earned a promotion. And for the first time since I had known him, he could talk about the future without sounding afraid. I was proud because I thought we had done what couples were supposed to do: carry more when the other person needed it, then find the balance again. Not long after his promotion, we started talking about buying a small cabin outside the city. I wanted somewhere quiet where work could not follow me, and Brent liked having a place he could repair with his own hands. My credit was stronger, so the financing depended heavily on my application, but we both contributed to the down payment. We talked about weekends there, holidays with family, and maybe keeping it permanently if we married. At first, Colleen said the cabin proved Brent had finally settled down. Later, she began saying those same words differently, as if settling down might mean settling for less. She liked to remind him that he had once been spontaneous, especially when he was with Brooke. I dismissed it as nostalgia because Brent never seemed interested in going backward. Then Brooke returned through a showroom project at his company, and Brent told me himself before I even asked. Brooke came back into Brent's life through a showroom project his company was handling. And at first, he treated it like nothing more than work. He told me she had been hired to help style several spaces and that they would have to coordinate during the setup. I appreciated that he told me before I ever had to ask, because it made me feel like there was nothing to hide. For the first few days, I believed that completely. What changed first was not Brent's schedule. It was the way he started talking about the years he had spent with Brooke. Trips he once described as exhausting suddenly became adventurous. and her habit of changing plans at the last minute became spontaneous instead of unreliable. I noticed the difference because I had heard those same stories when we first met. Only back then they had sounded like reasons he never wanted to live that way again. One night, Brent came home late after helping with the showroom setup. While we ate, he mentioned that Brooke had a strong idea about turning small cabins into content retreats for lifestyle brands. I told him it sounded a little like our place, and his expression changed before he quickly said it had nothing to do with us. After that, he started bringing up how little we used the cabin and whether it should be making money instead of sitting empty most weekends. The idea itself did not bother me. What bothered me was how defensive Brent became whenever Brooke was part of the conversation. One evening, I finally asked whether she had ever been to our cabin, and he immediately said no, then asked why I was suddenly interrogating him. I told him I was asking one question, but he said I was turning an ordinary work project into a relationship problem. I let the conversation end there because I did not want jealousy deciding what I believed. Still, his reaction stayed with me longer than his answer did. About 2 weeks later, Brent brought up refinancing the cabin and said interest rates might give us a better monthly payment. He told me the paperwork would be simple and that all I needed to do was sign once it arrived. But I reminded him that I read every financial document before putting my name on it. Brent laughed and said that was exactly why he let me handle those things. At the time, it sounded harmless, almost affectionate. I did not know he had already started talking about the cabin with Brooke in ways he had never discussed with me. And I had no idea that the paperwork he wanted me to sign would be the first place those conversations became impossible to deny. The cabin weekend was supposed to be simple. Raymond wanted to repair part of the porch before winter, so Brent planned to drive up with his parents and Megan on Friday afternoon. I had an audit that weekend and could not leave work, which disappointed me because I usually enjoyed those trips. Brent called it the Caldwell Work Crew Weekend and promised there would be another one when my schedule cleared. Before he left, I helped him pack a few tools he had forgotten in the storage closet. He kissed me in the kitchen and reminded me that the refinance documents should arrive sometime over the weekend. He said I could sign them whenever I had a few minutes because the rate offer would not stay open forever. Nothing about the conversation made me think Brooke would be anywhere near our cabin. Saturday afternoon. Megan sent the first picture. Brooke was standing beside Brent on the front steps, while Colleen handed her the spare key I had made for the family months earlier. I stared at it, trying to find an explanation that did not make my stomach tighten. When I finally asked Megan what Brooke was doing there, she replied that she thought I knew because Brooke had come to look at the cabin and share some ideas. I told Megan it was fine and hoped they enjoyed the weekend. Then more pictures appeared in the family album. Brooke stayed through dinner, and one photo showed an overnight bag beside the stairs near the guest room. By then, I knew this was not someone stopping by for a quick business conversation. Brent called that evening as if nothing unusual had happened. He told me the porch repair had gone well. His mother was making dinner, and everyone was planning to turn in early. I asked who was staying at the cabin, and he named Raymond, Colleen, and Megan before pausing. Then he admitted Brooke had stopped by for work and might stay because it was getting late. I asked why he had not told me she was coming. Brent said he knew I would make it into something bigger than it was, and he did not want the weekend ruined by an argument. That answer bothered me more than if he had simply admitted he should have told me. He had hidden something first, then used the reaction I had never even had as the reason for hiding it. After we hung up, I sat alone at my desk for several minutes. Then the refinance package arrived in my email. Brent sent one more message asking me to sign it before Monday morning. Instead, I opened every attachment and started reading. I read the refinance package the same way I read risk files at work. Slowly. Most of it looked like Brent had described. The payment would drop. The rate was better. And both names were attached to the loan. Then I reached an attachment labeled Proposed Property Use. The cabin was no longer described as a personal second residence. It was listed as a furnished short-term retreat with projected income, photography costs, furniture updates, and a promotional budget. I kept reading until I saw Brooke's styling business listed under consultant services. My hands went cold, but I read again to be certain. This was not an idea Brooke had mentioned over dinner. There was a budget, a timeline, and enough detail to show they had been discussing it for weeks. My name was still needed on the refinance because my credit and income helped qualify us for better terms. Brent was asking me to use my financial stability to support a plan he had built with his ex without telling me. I called him and asked one question. How long has Brooke been working on this proposal? Brent went quiet before saying about 3 weeks, then insisted it was only a business concept. I asked why a concept involving our cabin had been discussed with Brooke before it was discussed with me. He said he knew I would reject it before understanding the opportunity. I reminded him that the cabin belonged to both of us, and if the idea was good, there was no reason to hide it. Brent said I was too cautious and that Brooke understood how to make things happen instead of analyzing everything. For the first time, I heard what he believed about me. I asked him one final question. If this was still our property, why was I the only person excluded from the conversation about its future? Brent did not answer. Instead, he reminded me that the rate lock could expire if I refused to sign. I stopped arguing. I told him I would not sign the refinance package and that I needed space. Brent became angry, saying I was risking an opportunity because I was jealous of Brooke. I ended the call knowing the problem was much larger than jealousy. I stayed with Dana for a few days because I needed enough distance to think clearly. Brent kept sending messages saying I was letting jealousy ruin a financial opportunity that could have benefited both of us. Then Colleen called and told me Brooke was only helping with decorating ideas. Nothing more. When I asked whether she knew Brooke planned to stay overnight at the cabin, Colleen went quiet long enough to answer the question without saying a word. Later that evening, Megan called me privately. She sounded uncomfortable and said there was something I needed to know. Brent had told the family that I was losing interest in the cabin and that, if the business idea worked, we might eventually sell my share so he could keep it. I told Megan there had never been a single conversation like that between us. That was when the story began splitting apart. Brent told me Brooke was only a consultant. He told his family I was already stepping away from the cabin. And apparently, he had told Brooke something else entirely. None of those versions could all be true at the same time. Brooke called me the next morning after Megan spoke with her. She asked whether Brent and I had already agreed that I would leave the cabin project. I told her no, and that I had only learned about the proposal when the refinance documents arrived. Brooke went silent, then said Brent had told her I thought the cabin was too expensive and wanted out. She explained that Brent had talked about refinancing first, then eventually buying out my share if the retreat idea worked. I told her he had never discussed any of that with me. Brooke sounded genuinely shaken. Then she admitted they had kissed once, 2 weeks earlier, and Brent had told her our relationship was almost over. I felt the pain of hearing it, but I was calmer than I expected. The kiss hurt, but it was not the part I could not get past. Brent had created a different version of the future for every person involved, then expected all of us to keep playing our parts. By the end of that call, Brooke told me she was pulling out of the cabin project completely. I did not try to take the cabin from Brent, and I did not use the property to punish him. We met with a mediator and put our contributions on the table. I told Brent there were only 2 choices left. He could refinance the cabin in his own name and buy out my share, or we could sell it and divide the proceeds based on what each of us had contributed. Brent wanted to keep the cabin and sounded confident he could make it work without me. He said the lender would approve him and the retreat idea could become profitable. I did not argue or remind him how much my credit had helped us qualify. I told him to apply and let the numbers answer. A week later, the numbers did exactly that. Brent could qualify alone, but the rate was much higher, and the payment would be difficult without the income he expected from the retreat plan. He looked at me and said I knew removing myself would make everything harder. I told him if a plan only worked while the person being pushed out still carried the financial risk, then it was never his plan. Raymond spoke to Brent after learning what happened. He told his son Colleen had not forced him to lie. Brooke had not forced him to tell different stories. And I had not forced him to hide the proposal. Brent had made those choices because he wanted every option available without losing anything first. For once, he stopped calling it a misunderstanding. In the end, Brent could not refinance the cabin on terms he could manage, so we agreed to sell it. The proceeds were divided according to our contributions, and neither of us walked away ruined. 5 months later, Brent asked to meet and told me therapy helped him understand that he never wanted a cabin business. He wanted the version of himself Brooke made him remember. And when I asked why finding that version required turning me into the person standing in his way, he had no answer. By the time Brent and I met again, the cabin was sold and there was nothing left to negotiate. He told me he had stopped talking to Brooke and understood how nostalgia had distorted our relationship. I told him I did not need him to hate Brooke or blame Colleen to prove he had changed. If he understood what happened, he had to accept that the choices were his. Brent said he used to think I was too cautious, practical, and focused on stability. I told him caution had never held him back. It helped us build a life he once said he wanted. He only called it a limitation when a version of his life looked more exciting. Then I told him what I had understood. You did not leave me for your ex, Brent. You tried to use the life we built together as the down payment on a life where I was not included. He looked at the table and did not try to explain himself. I told him I hoped he learned how to build something without needing another person to carry the risk. But I was not going back to see whether he could. When I walked away, I did not feel triumphant. I felt finished. And that was better. After the cabin sold, I used part of my share to replace the car I had postponed buying for years. I put the rest into savings and started dating again slowly. I stopped treating usefulness as proof that someone loved me. Being needed and being valued were not the same thing. Brooke did not steal my future. Brent opened the door to the past and tried to make my present pay for it. If you have ever realized you are carrying more of a relationship than you should, tell me what finally made you see it. If this story stayed with you, like and subscribe.